Hi, this is Simon from writtenlegalenglish.com and welcome to this video in which I'm going to go through my suggested answer for the text I asked you to redraft for competition week 2. So let's get started. Okay, so behind me you can see the text that I asked you to redraft. The manager does not undertake and shall not be bound to exercise the license granted to the manager hereunder, but shall inform the writer in writing in the event of the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license in any event not later than a date of some kind. Now, this is a complex piece of writing, but not complex in a good way, not good complex. This is not good sophistication of language. This is nightmarish, horrible legal English because it means that you as the reader have to do all of the work. You have to look at all of that text and try to work out what's going on. And that's why I wanted you to redraft it. I want you to get into the habit, maybe not the habit, but certainly start practicing looking at complex legal texts, identifying them as not being good, because any text that you have to spend time on to actually work out what the author was trying to say is not a well-written piece of text. Okay, this is not high-level sophistication of writing. This is bad legal English writing. What is good legal English writing is hopefully your redraft, which is still professional, still legal, still businesslike, but just a lot easier to understand. The two main criteria that I was looking at in terms of redrafting this text were removing problematic language, of which there is quite a lot in that text, and then dividing up the information so it then becomes a lot easier for the reader to read. So let's start. So first of all, let's have a look at the problematic language, and you can see I've listed it behind me. So we've got shall. I've done lots of videos on shall, and there's lots of information out there from legal English doctrine writers criticizing shall and identifying the problems with shall. Needless to say, we should not be using it in our legal writing, but we should be saying something else instead, using a stronger legal English verb to communicate the message. We've got legalese hereunder. What exactly does that mean? Let's use this opportunity to get rid of that ambiguous legalese and replace it with something a lot more precise and a lot more concrete. In the event of and in any event are both legal prepositional phrases. How can we simplify them? Do we really need them? Well, this is part of the process of looking at the text and trying to understand what the main message is. There are some other words there as well. For example, undertake. It could be something that you could simplify, and there are one or two others as well. So if we were just going to have a look at those 4 issues that I've put up there, my first level redraft or my first redraft might be something like this, and you can see it. Let me just get myself out of the way because I can see that I'm blocking the text. The manager does not undertake and is not bound. So I understand shall here to be used as what they call a legal breath. That is to say, some lawyers just use shall because they think they need to use shall. Put shall in a text, it becomes legal. This is not the appropriate use of shall. Shall legally, officially means to impose a duty upon someone, have an obligation to do something. In other words, it really means must. And if we take that meaning of shall and put that into the sentence, the manager does not undertake and must not be bound to exercise the license, it doesn't really make sense. Which is why when you've got shall used as a legal breath, we simply remove the shall and use a verb instead. And in this case, I think it might be is. So does not undertake and is not bound, and you can see there I've crossed out some language that we don't need. So, and is not bound to exercise the license granted to the manager under this agreement. So I've translated here under to mean under this agreement, but it could be the case that it could be under this section or under this clause or under a different area, a different part of the contract. And this is why hereunder is ambiguous. So I've just said, okay, presumably it's going to be under this agreement. And then we've got another shall, but shall inform. If you have a look at the original text, it says, but shall inform the writer. Here I've understood shall to mean that this is creating an obligation. So I've said, but must inform the writer in writing of the manager's intention. And this is how I've translated this legal prepositional phrase, in the event of the manager's intention. So in writing of the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license, and in any event not later than. Now, on this first level redraft, I've left that second legal prepositional phrase in place, but it will be changed in just a few seconds. Okay, so the second thing I wanted you to do was to divide up the information to see the messages in the text. Now, the original text is at the top, and all I've done, as you can see here, is I've just used the Enter key. This is what I said in the video last week, that just read the sentence, and when you think that it's the end of a point or a new point is being made, just hit the Enter key. And you can see that with my first level redraft. So I've got the manager, okay, I've hit Enter because now I know someone will be doing something. So, okay, the manager, hit Enter, does not undertake, okay, that's one thing. Hit Enter, is not bound, okay, that's another thing, hit Enter, to exercise the license granted to the manager under this agreement. Okay, so I can see now that I can see that's the first point. It's becoming to be a little bit clearer. And then we continue. But must inform the writer in writing, okay, hit Enter, of the manager's intention not, and I could hit Enter there if I wanted to, but I'm running out of space on the screen behind me, of the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license, and hit Enter again, in any event not later than whatever the date might be. So it's a simple technique, but it really helps you to understand complex texts. You just break everything down onto different lines, and then in that process you start to think and you start to understand and you start to work out what the author might actually be saying. Okay, so let's get on to the suggested redrafts. And straight away, in order to divide up the text into information that a reader might see or be able to identify easily, I've used tabulation, inline tabulation. So the manager, A, does not undertake, and B, is not bound. So now I can see those 2 points clearly. To exercise the license granted to the manager under this agreement. Full stop, onto a new line. However, and here I've got 2 variations. And this is how you interpret the text. Because remember, that's what we're doing here. We're trying to interpret the text. But it might be the case that in interpreting the text, you might find that you can understand the text in 2 or perhaps more possible ways. And this is what I've highlighted here. If you have a look at the underlined text, and then have a look at the tabulation, where A starts and where B starts, you can see that it starts in different places, and that might have a material meaning or a material change in meaning on how I would understand the text. So the first one says, however, the manager must inform the writer in writing, A, of the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license, or B, in any event. And I've put here what, because for me, what's missing here is information. In any event of what? This is information that I think should be included in this point. And of course, we don't have the context, because I've only given you a little bit of text, to work out what that is. So this what is just a comment for the author, or it's a comment to yourself to fill that information in later on in the drafting process. If we have a look at the second version, you can see that I've started the tabulation a lot earlier. So, however, the manager must. So I've created that obligation, and there are 2 obligations. One, inform the writer in writing about the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license, or B, in any event, what, not later than whatever that might be. Now, we've got 1 or 2 issues there with tabulation and parallel phrasing, but I'll save that for other videos. But you can see here how I've used tabulation could create 2 different messages. The first one at the top says that A and B must be done in writing. Now the second version says that something must be done, but only point A is in writing, whereas a point B might not necessarily be in writing. So this is a question for you as to how you would interpret this. Would you interpret it in the first version, as I have done in the first version, or as I have done in the second version? And of course, you might be thinking, why is it possible that I could interpret it in two different ways? Well, the answer inevitably is because the author made a mistake. The author wrote this text badly, because any text that can be interpreted in two different ways or more is a badly written legal text. Just something to think about. Okay, so now that we've done a second level redraft, a third level redraft might concentrate on what's the basic main message and how can we communicate that in the best possible way. And of course, that is fairly strong editing. Now, in the process of you, as you're writing, this is a skill that can definitely be developed. So you do a first draft, you do a second draft, you see what changes you can make, and then the third draft might be, okay, what am I really trying to say, and will the client understand it in the way that I want it to be understood? And it's that third and even more levels of redraft that is where you're beginning to create that fantastic legal English text that hopefully can't be challenged. So let's have a look at what I've done here. So the first sentence is a change. I've got rid of the tabulation and I've said, this agreement does not oblige the manager to exercise the license granted to the manager, because I figured possibly that A and B essentially can be covered by this idea of not creating an obligation. Now, you may disagree with me, and that's fine, because we don't have the context, so it's impossible to strongly argue this is what the author meant. But the purpose of this is just to show you the possibilities. So if you disagree, then leave a comment below, and I'll happily read and get engaged in that conversation with you. But I think that it could mean simply that the agreement doesn't oblige the manager to do something. And so that's what I've written. Now I've got to the second bit about how to best write the that possibly debatable part. What does it exactly mean? And I've come up with two different variations. So, however, the manager must inform the writer in writing of the manager's intention not to exercise the manager's license, or of something else, which is that what, before the date which hasn't been selected yet. And you can see here, for the purposes, I said earlier on that there would be some parallel phrasing problems. Here I've solved that because both points begin with prepositions. So here we've got parallel phrasing and it's easier to read. So that's one potential redraft. The other one could be, however, the manager must inform the writer in writing of the manager's intention. Or B, and I've thought about this and I thought it could be that it's contacted the writer to, and then we've got that action, before a certain date. Now, of course, this is my interpretation and perhaps I've interpreted it a little bit too much, and that's fine. If that's what you think, you're absolutely right. Remember, what we're doing here is we're just interpreting the text and pushing the text to find out what it means. Of course, or what it could potentially mean. Of course, if we had more context, then we could perhaps narrow down what we think it means much more precisely. But given that there's no context, this is just an exercise in how we can create better messages. And I think you'll agree that the two messages that are behind me are still professional, legal, business-like, and a lot easier for the client to understand.